Free-to-players have always held an important place in the RuneScape community. Back in the day, these were the kids whose parents wouldn't buy them membership, but nowadays, it's a different story. Obviously, as you can tell by the title of this video, I don't think very highly of free-to-players because they're extremely greedy and demanding. They are always looking for handouts. They want free gold, and they are not willing to put in the work that it takes to earn gold. Today I've decided to walk around World 301, the free-to-play trade world, so that I can attempt to understand the free-to-play community better. Maybe if I could see things from their point of view, I would think more highly of them. I want to find out what makes these people do the things that they do, and most of all answer the question on all of our minds, why are free-to-players so greedy? I started off by walking around on my main with max melee gear because I wanted to attract as much attention as possible so that I could see that good old-fashioned free-to-play greed in action. I had my friend with me at this point just in case I needed backup. Sure enough, I attracted plenty of attention. Instantly, I got swarmed with people demanding money. That's the first thing I'd like to point out is that free-to-players seem to have completely abandoned the idea of putting any effort whatsoever into their begging strategies. They don't beat around the bush. They don't try to be polite. They just follow you around and demand gold. This is a problem. Typically, you would expect beggars to make up some reason that they need gold and have a bit of a dialogue with you, maybe provide some backstory, or at the very least try to scam you with some made-up story about how they can pay you back once they get a bond, but it appears those days are gone. The demanding nature of beggars on free-to-play is very alarming due to how detrimental it is to the social aspect of the game. These people are not interested in conversation. Their only mission is extracting gold from players like me and players like you. I tried to ask these people a few questions about the free-to-play lifestyle and why exactly they were so greedy and annoying, but as I expected, it was like talking to a brick wall. Apparently, having manners is a members-only skill now. I realized pretty quickly I was getting absolutely nowhere with my main, so I decided to hop onto my free-to-play alt to conduct some interviews. I was able to get some answers out of this alleged woman who was claiming her bond ran out, and she was just here for a minute to buy another bond. I was instantly critical of this story because I don't really believe anything that free-to-players have to say, but I did my best to let her say her piece. She did not speak highly of the free-to-play experience, claiming that it was boring. I knew right then and there just how ungrateful this woman was. Perhaps I was onto something. Could it be that the greediness of free-to-players stems from their inability to be grateful for the content that the free-to-play game has to offer? I had to know more. As this interview continued, it took everything in my power to be able to keep my cool. She was patronizing me with false claims of other accounts and a busy real life. Finally, I tried to be direct, asking her why free-to-players are so greedy. Of course, she was making up excuses for them, saying they want to get mems, a very predictable response. I was prepared for this, however, and I did what I could to hold her accountable. I knew going into this that the only way to understand the psychology of such a complex group of individuals was to face this head on. She claimed that she didn't actually do any begging herself, and then she subtly tried to offload blame onto all those other free-to-players, which actually brought me to another extremely important conclusion. Free-to-play players hate accountability, and they tend to blame others for their own shortcomings. This could be a major factor in why these people are so greedy. Perhaps they find a way to blame their horrible greediness on other players. As my time in free-to-play wore on, I was growing less and less patient with the free-to-play community as a whole. Nevertheless, I was on a mission to understand these people, so I wasn't going to stop here. I conducted more interviews and gained more knowledge. Another free-to-player brought up the theory that it was possible that many of the players on these worlds were under the influence of copious amounts of hard drugs, and it made sense. It appeared most people I had talked to were not acting rationally. They were not of sound body and mind. Maybe drug use was at the root of all of this. Could it be possible that the vast majority of free-to-players are completely inept at managing their gold because they're too strung out on various drugs to have any idea what's going on around them? It seemed to explain a lot of their tendencies, always making excuses and blaming everyone around them for their problems, pointing the finger at absolutely everything else other than the fact that they likely have a severe drug problem. Finally, I was able to interview a guy who was actually begging begging me for gold. This guy here dressed up as a banker. As you can probably tell, he's clearly under the influence of multiple controlled substances and experiencing a state of psychosis. His name was Accepting GP, and he was going around begging everyone for gold as you would expect. He seemed to be in denial about this, but nonetheless, I was demanding answers. As you could imagine, he launched into a string of excuses about how accepting GP was different from begging for GP, thus continuing the trend of free-to-players refusing to take accountability for their actions. I got more than I bargained for with this guy, as he seemed to be under the impression that every human is greedy at their core. I had to hit him with a little reality check, telling him that members in this game aren't actually greedy, it's only free-to-players. I exaggerated and lied a bit just to get the point across, but that's really the only way to communicate with these people. The one thing that I'd heard repeated by a few of these guys is that free-to-play was basically a social chat room that people really only logged into for nostalgic purposes. This made sense to a degree, but I decided to completely ignore it and press forward because I decided free-to-players were greedy earlier in the video, and it's way too late to go back on that now. The bottom line of this issue is that people wearing full iron with a bank value of 15k will just go around demanding 3 mil. They want you to 200x their bank value. That's pure greed if I've ever seen it. At this point in my research, I knew I had to switch up my approach. The issue earlier is I was being way too friendly and understanding with all these free-to-play individuals, so I decided to approach this next group of players a lot more aggressively. This guy in the dragon boots was extremely toxic to me for absolutely no reason, but nonetheless I continued to pressure him for answers. At a certain point, I figured that one of these free-to-players would actually take responsibility for their actions, but this guy was clearly not going to be the one to do that. He was trying to distance himself from the free-to-play community by pointing out his necklace. This was a massive cope on his part. In fact, even if he did have a membership, he was still standing in free-to-play, which means he isn't absolved of explaining why free-to-players are so greedy. Eventually, this guy just stopped engaging with the questions entirely. He was just hurling insults and claiming that he was actually winning the argument, so there was really no point to continue speaking to him. And also, I'm pretty sure he put me on ignore. For my very last interview of the day, I decided to confront this guy splashing guards with a few questions. This entire conversation was an unmitigated disaster. This guy was more offended than anyone I've ever seen at the suggestion that he begged for his gold, which means there's about a 100% chance he did actually beg for his gold. He quickly went from delusional to angry, as he just resorted to shouting insults at me instead of addressing my points. Apparently, toxicity is a massive problem in the free-to-play community as well, but that's a topic for another video. We went back and forth for a while, but as this whole thing played out, I realized that there was just no way I was going to be able to come to any sort of understanding with these people. To answer the big question of why free-to-players are so greedy, you could point to the drugs, you could point to the coping, but at the end of the day, we'll never really know because most of them are in complete denial about their greed. As the guy I was interviewing started to become more aggressive and threatened to PK me, I knew my time on free-to-play had come to a close. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.